So this is about your great-grandmother. Her name was Daisy. She did not have a middle name.
And what
She
was
was
her
the old
maiden name?
Klein. She was the oldest of 4 children. She had 1 sister and 2 brothers. Her father's name was Morris, and her mother's name was Sarah. They were my grandparents. Her father, my grandpa, died before World War II, around 1937, so I hardly remember him. But her mother, Sarah, was my grandmother. She was my closest relative. She adored me. I was her oldest grandchild, and she was very partial to me. My grandmother was unapologetically partial to me. She had 6 grandchildren, but it was as if the other 5 didn't exist. She was very partial to me.
What do you think that was?
I don't know, but I was very partial to her. She was unbelievable to me. She couldn't do enough for me. She had a strong maternalistic feeling toward me. She adored me. She lived with us for a while, and when she lived with us, she cooked most of the meals.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, I always got the best part of the chicken. She cooked special parts of the chicken livers used to come with the chicken, and that was like a delicacy, and she would cook it. It was fabulous the way she cooked the chicken livers. I always got the chicken liver. It was only about this big, so only one person could eat it, and I got it every time. When she passed away, she was in a coma, and my daddy flew me up to New York from Memphis. She was no longer conscious, but she was still alive when I got to New York. And I was there when she died.
Mm.
She was unbelievable.
Mm.
And we named Sharon after her, my first child.
So your grandparents and your mother were originally in what is now Ukraine, is that right?
Yes, but your great-grandmother was born around 1880 something in Russia. My mother was born in Russia, in the Ukraine. She was very unusual because she came here when she was a year old, but her parents didn't speak English, but she was only a year old, so she was really an American girl.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't tell she was born over there. She had no accent. She had no accent at all. Most of the other people had accent. My father had an accent, heavy accent. And most of those immigrants had accent. My mother was an American woman. You would never have known she was not born here. Even though they were fluent in Russian, they never used it. They used Yiddish.
Oh,
They all
yeah.
spoke Yiddish. And Yiddish, I understood Yiddish because it was the lingua franca in the house. But all the immigrants were like that. The Italians the same way. They spoke Italian in the house, and when they learned English, they spoke English everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But this is something very interesting. You never heard anybody speaking of their lives in Europe. Not one word.
Oh, really?
Never, ever. And by the way, my relatives, we had an enormous family. We had our own newspaper. The family had a newspaper.
Wow.
And that's because a lot of the people in the family were in the printing trades. They worked for the New York Times, printing the paper every day. And so we had a newspaper, family newspaper. It had all the bar mitzvahs, weddings, Anything that happened to anybody in the family, pictures, it was like a newspaper, a regular paper, came out, would be in the mailbox. They would mail it to me. We had a huge family, but it was all my mother's relatives because my father never had a relative who resided in the United States. So most of these people got elected to be president of the PTA for 1 year. My mother was the PTA president for about 6 years. The whole time that I was in grade school, and the whole time my sister was actually 8 years, she was the PTA president because they didn't have anyone like that. She could do everything. She was like an American, you know. They didn't have any American women. They were American women, and they were naturalized, some of them. But she was like you couldn't tell the difference between her and the teachers, you know. She had some college education. She was very smart. So she was different than the other women. She went to school here. She probably went to college here for a while. I don't think she had a collegiate degree, but she was a music. She played the piano beautifully.
Wow.
I was lucky to have my mom. She was erudite. She was talented, smart. She was very unusual. Your great grandmother was. She was 1 in a million. My mother and father split up. They got divorced. I was probably 14. And then when I was about 16, they got back together again. And they remarried.
Oh.
And they stayed married until my mother died. She had some mental disorder. She died in an institution when I was away at school. But by that time, my father and her had remarried. They had from what I could see, I wasn't living at home, but they seemed to have a good relationship. He was very upset when she passed away. She was in a large group of family members, she acted like she was the mother of everyone there, you know, and they respected her as if she was. So she was. That's the way it was back then, you know. Everything. When I had my bar mitzvah, we had a celebration that lasted 2 days.
Wow.
It lasted we came back from the synagogue after the ceremony at the synagogue when I did my bar mitzvah. And then everyone came in. A lot of the people were not Jews because we lived in a non-Jewish neighborhood. We were the only Jews in the neighborhood. And the place was crowded. She did it in the house. It was catered in the house. And people were coming in all the time. And my bedroom, I had a large bedroom of my own. My sister had one, and my family, my mother and father had one. And the room was from floor to ceiling presents in my room. And people were coming in. There must have been, I don't know how many people showed up, but they came all afternoon and into the night. And then on Sunday, same thing. They had a celebration, which my grandmother and my mother catered. And people came in all day long. It must have been over 100 easily in that apartment. Came to the affair. I don't know what you call it. And I got 1 million. Listen, my bedroom was piled from floor to ceiling, literally, with presents. I got all kinds of shit.
Did your mother have any professional occupations or?
She was a stenographer, a secretary, and she worked for Norman Thomas, who was a presidential candidate on the socialist ticket. And she was his secretary for for a while. I don't know how long, but he ran maybe more than once. He was.
Was that like a third-party campaign, or?
Yeah. He was a socialist, probably the preeminent socialist in the early 20th century in the United States. It was Norman Thomas, maybe one other guy, but the Socialist Party was an important political entity in the United States, especially around New York City.
Mm-hmm.
She was his secretary.